Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Well, we're here today with one of America's most famous and accomplished trial lawyers, Randi McGinn from New Mexico. How are you today, Randi?
I'm well, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Great to hear. This is no easy thing because Randi's very busy trying to get a time for a podcast. Took quite a bit of work, but we finally got here. And so we're going to have a great discussion about a lot of things Randi's doing and what she's going to be teaching in Vegas and some of her philosophy on being a trial lawyer. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So
okay, let's go.
Let's get started.
Let's do it.
Randy, how did you tell us about the time when you had this epiphany that you decided you wanted to become a lawyer?
Well, so Dan, I did not have an epiphany. I'm one of those people who didn't like want to be a lawyer since I was a little kid. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a storyteller, and did that through learning how to write and to becoming a journalist is what I was first, and had no concept of being a lawyer, and was working for a newspaper as a newspaper reporter, and was sending in spec articles to magazines, and it was obvious to me that they were being immediately rejected without being read. And I was complaining to my uncle, who was a professor at Harvard, about how no one was reading my stuff, and it was obvious, nobody even looked at them. And he said, well, why should they read anything that a punk kid from New Mexico like you writes? I think I was 20 years old or something. He said, if you had an advanced degree, people would read your stuff. And so it was that reason that I thought, okay, could I go to law school? Could I go to med school? Med school seems really hard and there's lots of blood. And so I said, I'll just go get a law degree and that'll be my thing behind my name, and then people will read my stuff. And so I went to law school not to become a lawyer, but to have people read the things that I wrote. And once I got there, by accident found the place I was always meant to be, because being a trial lawyer is storytelling on steroids. So not only do you investigate it like you do as a journalist, and from the giant big pile of facts have to pull out the heart of the story, but then you get to write it, and you get to produce it, and you get to direct it, and you get to star in it. And if you do it really, really well, a kind of verbal alchemy happens where you transform someone's true life story into justice at the end. And what could be better than that? I mean, that really was even better than storytelling. So found the place I was supposed to be.
Well, thank goodness, because it helps to find our place in life. In law school, tell us, where did you go to law school?
I went to the University of New Mexico Law School.
And what did you like best about that experience?
I hated law school.
Me too. Me too. What a waste of time. I thought, I just got to struggle through this nonsense to take this stupid bar exam and figure out how to make money or do something constructive, because I just
this is terrible. This is terrible. The Socratic method was very hard for me. I had always done really, really well in school, and you memorize the stuff that the professor needs for the exam, and then you regurgitate it to him at the end of the exam. And suddenly, in law school, when they start whacking you over the head with the Socratic method and keep making you wrong and making you wrong and making you wrong, you just want to say, just tell me the answer. Just tell me the answer so I can get it right now. In hindsight, as painful as it was, it taught me how to think differently, and made me a much better lawyer, because of course it makes you take a problem and turn it around and look at it from all different sides. But at the time, it hurt my head, and so I didn't like law school very much.
I hear you. A lot of this stuff still hurts my head tremendously. I'm like, wow, these lawyers, I got to do a lot of heavy thinking. I tell you.
They do.
I tell you.
They do.
That's why I try to work so hard to make sure we have our conferences, that they're fun, because so much
good.
of life is boring.
It gets rid of some of that stress.
It hurts the brain. So much is boring, and it hurts the brain. Well, Randy, you've been at this for quite some time now. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your career path. Tell us about, this, if you got your bar card one day back, I'm sure before the internet, when things came in the mail still and you had to open an envelope, bless you. Bless you. Okay. So from that day when you ran out to your mailbox, waiting for that envelope from the state bar in New Mexico to come, announcing your results, and actually seeing that you passed it, I'm sure it was, I know how exciting it is to pass the bar because I recently did it about 8 years ago in California after about 4 tries. So I was like thinking I'm never going to
Oh
pass it,
gosh.
but eventually
Oh
we
yeah.
do. But from the time you
Yeah.
passed the bar to where you are today, sitting on this podcast, tell us about your professional journey and the stops along the way.
Well, so when I got out of law school, I first went to work for a firm I had clerked for, which was an insurance defense firm. And I quickly realized did not want to do insurance defense. In fact, I kind of knew it at the time I started it. And after a year, quit and went to the district attorney's office and became a violent crimes prosecutor. And so prosecuted violent crimes in New Mexico for 3 years. And during that time, really learned how to try cases because you're on your feet all the time. You're in trial all the time. I think I had 36 major felony trials in 3 years, homicide cases and, you know, child molestation cases, rape cases, all the really serious things. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful training ground to learn how to try cases. And then after that, went out on my own and have been on my own ever since. Um, and that was going out on my own was sort of a different thing because there weren't any women trial lawyers at the time. There just weren't any.
What
In
year?
fact, I remember
What year are we talking?
We are talking 1985 when I went out to solo practice by myself.
That just on a
And
side note, that's the year I graduated from high school. I know that,
oh, you're such a baby.
I know you were wondering if we
Baby.
had any overlaps in our lives, but that's one of the overlaps we have. But
There you go. Well, so I can remember going to my bank where I'd banked for years and sitting down, and I had this whole prospectus. And when I had some cases that I was going to have, and I had about 30 cases that I thought I had prospects on, and I had plotted out when I would make the money, sat down across from this woman loan officer and said, here's my plan. I'm going to open up my own practice, have my own business. And she, after I do my whole presentation, she leans across the desk and pats me on the arm and says, honey, I think you better keep working for somebody else, is what she said to me. And I sat back and said, I think what I need to do is find another bank, is what I said to her. I went out and found another bank and got a line of credit and opened up my own practice. So, yeah, but it just wasn't done back then. Women didn't go out into business by themselves and weren't thought they were going to be successful. And there certainly were no women law firms in New Mexico at the time. So from there, I've built up my firm where I've got 3 women partners and 1 male partner now.
how'd you get the male partner? How'd you sneak in there?
He just got in the last 2 years.
Ah,
We actually had a male partner at the beginning, but he went on the bench within about 2 years after joining us. So we're now returning to our roots and have taken on another really great guy as our male partner.
fantastic. And when you were a prosecutor, though, because that's quite the jump from insurance defense to prosecutor, because I used to be a criminal defense lawyer, but did you have some mentoring in the prosecutor's office to, help you first learn how to put together these trials on these major cases?
Are you kidding me? They just threw you in. I mean, there was no mentoring. They just said, here's a file, go prosecute this case. So there really wasn't much mentoring at all. And you could go ask somebody a question if you got stuck, but usually we're just in the courtroom. So you have to figure out how to do stuff on your own. So it was trial by fire at that point.
Yep, it's funny because even on criminal defense, both sides, it's usually trial by fire. Not a whole lot of coaching and mentoring. It's like, and these are people's lives on the line, not just money. And nobody's giving guidance or coaching or mentoring. And you got these, sometimes young lawyers, first or second year's lawyer, defending a homicide or a rape case where somebody's looking at their life in prison, and the lawyer's more as scared as the defendant.
Right.
And it's really frightening and it's really
Yeah,
tragic
well, it's
because
I think they're much better now. I think our back then they weren't very good at all at training people, but I think now our DA's office and our public defender's office here in New Mexico have training programs finally, and they didn't have training programs back.
speaking of the DA's office in New Mexico, this is totally sidetracked, but how about
Okay.
that whole Alec Baldwin situation is very
Well,
fascinating.
I can't talk about it because
You're on the civil
Brian
case?
Panish and I Brian Panish and I are in the civil case. We're representing the Hutchins family.
Right. And that case isn't resolved, is it? You thought from what
It is
from
not
in the
resolved.
public area, I heard there may have been a settlement, but it's not really going through. So now I read Panish is like, yeah, we're going to trial.
Oh, all right. Well, I think the civil case is the one chance that there may be that for Helena to get justice
Right.
from him. So the civil case I expect will get wound up again, and we'll start all over again. So
Well, that's a lot, from a spectator standpoint, much more interesting than a confidential settlement. Just saying for the
well,
outsider perspective of, trial watchers, trial dogs. I know.
well, and there's a lot of facts that haven't come out yet still. And they didn't come out in this last criminal case. So we'll see.
We'll see. That's why we have
Uh-huh.
a civil justice system to get
Yeah.
through and get to the heart of it. Get to the heart of
Yeah.
it. All right. Let me ask you this, Randy. Now, as all the successes you currently have and experienced in your career, I want to ask you, what is the loss that you've experienced? The trial loss that most bothers you because I personally have one that still eats at me because I know that the lawyer I am today would crush that case. And because I wasn't that lawyer, some human being is suffering a lifetime of a conviction that should not be on the record. And there's nothing I can do about that except work harder, train harder, and help other people to prevent such injustice. But what is that case for you?
So it's one when I was young too. I mean, so I've tried like between 137 and 140 cases, and have lost 7. So haven't lost very many. But isn't it funny that the ones you remember the most are not the ones you won, it's the ones that you lost. It's just kind of a quirk of human nature. And so the one that I regret is one that I tried years ago when I was a young lawyer that involved a young man who was Middle Eastern. And in my naivete as a young lawyer, I thought jurors would not, be prejudiced against him, and didn't do the kind of voir dire I would do now to flesh out those kind of prejudices. And I'm sure that's why we lost. I'm sure it was just uncut prejudices that I didn't uncover in voir dire that kept him from a verdict. And it was a civil case. It wasn't a criminal case. It was a civil case. But still, I'm like you. I think if I could go back now, I could nail that case. I could do that case now. But back then, I just was kind of naive about and trusting about not failing to get off the case killer jurors, the people who were prejudiced and could never look past his being Middle Eastern to give him a verdict.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one.
All right. Let's talk about the opposite side of that coin. What case, what accomplishment, what in your as being a trial lawyer are you most proud of? Do you look at that and say, wow, this really helped define who I am and how I want the world to see me? And that I'm very, that I could be a part of this.
Probably it is the kind of work we did in the case that's in my book, Changing Laws, Saving Lives. One where where our little firm is taking on a corporate giant of some kind. And in that case, it was the largest convenience store chain in the Southwest, a convenience store chain called Allsup's, who for years had required their employees to work alone on the graveyard shift in their convenience stores. And for our client, who was a 26-year-old mother who had decided to quit her day job and go back to school because she had 3 little kids, 7, 4, and 2. And she still needed to work because she was a single mother. So she took this job in the convenience store at nighttime. And they put her out in this convenience store on the edge of town on the graveyard shift. And on her second night of work, she was kidnapped from the store, raped, and murdered. And the challenge in the case was, of course, the workers' compensation system. But in our state, we changed the law on workers' comp so that if an employer did something that was reckless or intentional, was so egregious that they were reckless or intentional, then you could sue them outside of workers' comp. So we had this very high burden to meet. We had to show that this convenience store chain had put its employees at risk for years. And that's exactly what we found. I mean, we found that over the course of 25 years, they had 13 different people killed in convenience stores on the graveyard shift. 13. And other people raped and assaulted and all kinds of other stuff, but 13 people killed. And including a woman who'd been killed in almost an identical situation, was kidnapped from the store I think it had occurred about 15 years before, kidnapped from the store, raped, and murdered. And on the day of her funeral, the head of the convenience store chain, a guy named Lonnie Alsups, came to her mother's house on the day of the funeral and said, "I'm so sorry this happened to your daughter. Is there anything we can do to make this better?" And the mother said, "Whatever you do, don't ever let a woman work alone on the graveyard shift again." And he said to her, "I promise you, I will never let a woman work alone on the graveyard shift again." And then walked out of her living room and continued to allow women to work alone on the graveyard shift. And who came in and testified, because it was years later, who came and testified about that was not her mother who had died, but it was her brother who was about 14 years old and was standing in the living room when that promise was made. And he, because of what had happened to his sister, had become a police officer. And he said it used to grate on him every time he went into an Allsup's convenience store that they were still having women work alone in the store and had not kept the promise to his mother after his sister was killed. And so it was quite a case. I mean, we tried it, and in addition to trying it and having a successful resolution, which I won't spoil for you because it's in the book, you have to read the book to find out what happened. We also organized a bunch of families who'd had family members killed or hurt in convenience stores to lobby our state OSHA board. It's called the Environmental Improvement Division here in New Mexico, but go around and testify at 5 different hearings to get the most stringent regulations for convenience stores of anywhere in the nation. And so now in New Mexico, as a result of the work we did in that case, and of course, all these families coming and testifying, they can no longer, convenience stores in New Mexico cannot let one person work alone in the graveyard shift. You have to have 2 people, or you have to have a person in a security guard, or you have to have a person behind a bullet-resistant enclosure so no one can get to them, or you have to close the store. And that's just the law in New Mexico. And ever since then, that's been the law in New Mexico. And what do you know? People have stopped dying in convenience stores.
And the book that you wrote, you said it was changing
laws, saving lives.
Changing laws.
How to take on corporate giants and win.
What was the motive it's one thing to try a case. It's another thing to sit on your tuchus for 200 hours or 300 hours and write a book and put all your thoughts into paper. So tell us about, I'm just curious, what was the motivation to do that?
Well, it's the same motivation that motivates me to teach. Because there was nobody to help me when I started out, and no examples of women lawyers, I thought it would be helpful to write a book that not only tells a story of a case, takes a story of a case, like the Garcia case, and Elizabeth Garcia was the young woman's name, the Elizabeth Garcia case, and then starts sort of the chronological story of the case and what happened in her case from the beginning through trial, but alternates chapters with legal advice so that somebody gets the feel for what is it like to be inside a case and to try a case. What is it like? Like, how do you decide to take the case at the beginning? Then you go back to the chronological story, and then you talk about how do you, once you take the case, how do you investigate a case? And then how did we investigate that case? And then how do you find witnesses, and how we found witnesses in that case? So it takes the chronological story and then drops in sort of technical chapters in between the chronological story, all the way from the beginning to trial. And that then, particularly for people who are thinking about going to law school, it gives them a good feel for what it's like to be a trial lawyer, because you're sort of inside the case as we go through it and talk about all the different things that we did to put the case together and then to take it all the way through trial.
Well, that is, because I didn't even know it was about that, like, because I haven't read the book, but I really like that format because it's a story plus the teaching. So it sticks.
Yes.
And like for law students, because this year at TLU Vegas, I'm giving out personally 25 law students, 25 scholarships to law students. So if there's any law students listening to this who would like to come to TLU Vegas, and if money is at all part of the obstruction, just send me an email, dan@triallawyersuniversity.com, and tell me why you want to come. And I will make sure that you start off, because so many people in law school have no idea what they want to do with their lives. And the last thing they ever thought about was becoming a plaintiff's lawyer, because there is just nobody's talking about being a plaintiff's lawyer. When I was in law school, plaintiff's lawyer, people talk about getting jobs in law firms or the prosecutor's office, but never becoming, people like personal injury. That's kind of tacky, isn't it? Those billboard lawyers. I mean, that's what people thought. And so I just think like how differently, my life would have been had I met people like you or Brian Panish or all the great lawyers that come to TLU when I was young. Give me an idea. So we're gonna.
Well, and if you were gonna have those people come, let me know if they want a book, and I'll give them a signed copy of my book too. How's that, Dan?
Well, that would be great, because I met 3 law. I was at last night for last week. I've been at the National Bar Association, which is the Black lawyers bar of all types of lawyers, and I met 3 law students there from San Diego. And so they're all going to be coming to Vegas. I'm very excited for them, because, it's got so much energy, and those big smiles are going to change the world, and I'm going to help them.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to help them.
Wonderful.
That's a start for my 25. And the sooner I get that done, the sooner and then have like a little program for the people too. So that way they're not just bouncing around alone, being scared, because intimidated.
Well, that'd be great. Well, and introduce them around so
yes.
that they can meet some real lawyers.
Yes. And then plus they could get jobs as, working in people's law firms to start to, and every person always wants great people in their firm. Like, even if they don't need to hire, like, there's a great person, let's find room for them. Right. Because there's just so few great people. So I'm pretty stoked about
idea.
Pretty stoked
Good
about
work.
Working on it, making the world a better place, do my part. Let's talk about TLU Vegas, because you're coming, and you've been to we skipped last year because we went to New York instead, but we did it in 2022 at the Mandalay Bay, and that was about a 1,200 person conference. And then our inaugural effort in 2021, we had about 750 people. So what did you like? You had both those programs. So what was some of your things that you liked about the programs, your favorite memories of them?
Well, just the ability to hang with people who do the same stuff that you do, who not just have great ideas, but there's just kind of synergy and energy in the group of people, both in the seminar and outside the seminar, a group of people who, for the most part, are on their own. So many plaintiffs' lawyers are sole practitioners or have very, very small firms, and so never get the chance to interact with each other and share the kind of ideas that we get to share. And by the way, yes, they're still talking work even at the cocktail party, because that's, you don't get a chance to talk to people about all the things that you do and what you love. And so that's really it, is the camaraderie that you have at the TLU University. It's just terrific.
Well, thanks. I work hard at the camaraderie, and and I kind of design it so that people are in smaller groups with 9 lecture tracks and 20 workshops, because everybody that shows up has insecurity, right? We have gaps in our skill sets and our knowledge, and everybody's gap is different. And that's why I try to give this big menu of what people could choose from doing every day so they can most fill the gap in their knowledge to get to where they want to go. And in a more, I guess, even though there's a lot of people there, the groups I don't think feel that big because there's so many of them with great lawyers teaching the folks what their specialty is. Because I never tell people what to speak on. I always tell people, what are you passionate about? What do you need to share with the world that if you were to, die prematurely, it would be a less just place? That's what you should share and teach. And so that's kind of my goal. And you're going to be speaking on 3 different days with 3 different lectures. And so can you tell us what those are about and what it is that, so the first one is called Winning Your Case in Opening Statement. Tell us what that presentation is about and why people need to be at it.
Okay, well, so the person, he or she who tells the best story wins. That's how trial works. And so if you are going to be a great trial lawyer, you have to be a great storyteller. And so we're going to talk about how you become a student of storytelling and different ways to tell a story and to tell the story of your case by using different voices, like whose perspective do you tell the story from? What chronology do you use? Do you use just a straight ahead chronology, or do you start at a different, more interesting place, like the time when the person's mother got the phone call that all of us dread? That may be the place that you start your case. And then how you choose what will be the most effective or most persuasive story for a jury. So that's what that one's about.
All right. How about finding the heart in damages?
Oh, isn't that interesting? We just had a big article in New Mexico about how we're getting monster verdicts, which are, compared to California, our verdicts are not monster verdicts, but for New Mexico, we're starting to get some huge verdicts here. And one of the defense lawyers had an interesting observation in response to this article, which was, I think the verdicts in New Mexico are getting bigger, not because liability is getting better, but because the plaintiffs' lawyers have finally figured out how to argue damages in a way that's more than just straight numbers, that they're really being able to explain to a jury what it means if somebody is a quadriplegic, or what it means if somebody has lost their loved one. And so their take was interesting. A defense lawyer's take was the plaintiffs have finally figured out how to basically touch the heart of the jurors with the damages of the plaintiff. And so that's what this talk is going to be about how you get beyond the numbers, like here's a bunch of numbers of what their earning capacity would be, but here's the real loss that happened in the case.
All right. And then the third presentation lecture is Velvet Cross-Examination.
Velvet Killer Cross-Examination.
Oh, sorry, we forgot the killer, the Velvet Killer. You could be velvet and kind, or you have to kill sometimes.
Well, so this is going to be like a talk where I download everything I know about cross-examination. How's that? And it is completely different from what you learned in law school. I mean, in law school, you thought you had to get the person, right? Like you're going to take them out. And that was my first cross that I ever did, which I'll talk to them about there. You're going to take them out. And that is not the most effective way to do cross. And I'm going to give a whole new approach to both to cross-examination and to what we were told in law school was you have to control the witness. I think you cannot control the witness. Control is an illusion. And what you can do is expose the witness for not answering your questions or for being a liar, but you can't really control anything. But I'm going to give some techniques to show people how to do that.
All right. Sounds great. I personally can't wait because not only are you going to be there, but a lot of your friends from the inner circle, like Ben Rabinowitz from New York, and of course Brian Panish, Rahul Ravapudi, Lloyd Bell. Perhaps Del Gallipo.
Old Home Week. It's going to be Old Home
Pat
Week.
Salby, one of your newer members from Chicago. He's got a trial that should get resolved, so he'll be able to be there. But some really, and just so many great lawyers from around the country, like Sean Claggett, of course, and Nick Rowley's teaching 3 days, and So there's some real great stuff and fun stuff to do ahead of time. If you want to get here early, Randy, if you get here on Tuesday, on Wednesday, there's a
What are you
golf
doing?
outing, or there's
Okay.
Nick is taking a bunch of people out to Red Rock Canyon to do some yoga and hiking and just camaraderie. And then my other friend, Kurt Zahner, is going to take a group of people out to the desert to do a little ATVing and getting dune buggies and stuff. So just little.
As long as he's bringing them all back from the desert.
Yeah, they're bringing them all back. We're taking a head count before we go, but just little get together things for people to, be social, make friends, and prior to the conference, because conferences are a lot more fun when you have a lot of friends and you know a lot of people. And when people see you and their little faces light up and they say, "Hi, Randy, how are you?" That makes conferences more fun.
Just like life, isn't it? It's just like life. That's one of the secrets to longevity is having a lot of friends.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I do this, because I didn't have any friends before I started TLU.
Oh.
But I'm like, I got to find a way to make some new friends, because I'm 45 and got no friends in California. So this was my little. It might have been. It was a circuitous route to finding some new friends, but we're getting there.
Yep.
We're getting there. So I forgot to ask you, what do you do on a regular basis to constantly improve your skill set?
Well, I think teaching helps, because when you teach somebody what you're doing, you have to actually sit down and think about it, as opposed to just doing it by instinct. You have to break it down so you can explain it to somebody else. And then you self-analyze, well, does it really work? Is that really why I'm doing it? Why am I doing it this way? So that's very helpful. The other thing is I read all the time. I mean, since I'm a storyteller, I am a fan of stories. Read, watch movies, watch plays, I'm a sucker for a good story. And so that also teaches me a lot. And just the practice of law, by the way, why I like the practice of law so much is every time you have a new case, you learn something new. I mean, we don't do the same case over and over and over again. We have, so you learn all kinds of things. In one case, we learned how botulism gets into cans that gave somebody botulism poisoning. I mean, who'd ever know you'd be down in a factory in the South trying to figure out how the cans came through and where the botulism got into a can. But that kind of stuff is just fascinating to me. It's like huge problem solving, or the medical malpractice cases that you get where you have to figure out why this failed or why they didn't diagnose this person. And so everything is like a problem, a logic problem that you have to solve, and then tell the story of it and try to explain it to a jury. And so that's the other part that just keeps me invigorated, because we have new facts or new things that you learn every single day about some new topic you never thought you'd know about.
A new puzzle and a new challenge to solve. It's like
that's it.
Every day a new Rubik's Cube lands on your desk.
That's it. That's how it is.
Get strategic, learn from past experience, and figure out the new puzzle.
That's it.
That's it. All right, well, let's talk trial now, because you have all these years of wisdom and experience. And so we're going to do our best to transmute some of it to the audience. So, but let's talk about it in context of a case. So what is the because I want to talk to you about your approach to, voir dire and opening and direct, but what case is it that, that you wanted to use this that's recent trial that you want to talk about to help us understand your philosophy?
So it's probably the case of Riley Hine, who was a 16-year-old kid who was driving to school one morning for band practice early in the morning through the canyon on the freeway, when a semi-truck came up next to him, pushed him off the highway, and he avoided it by going off the side of the road, but there was a concrete median right in front of him, and he had to choose between hitting that or going back onto the road. And he went back onto the road, and when he did, he hit the truck, bounced off the median, and went under the back of the truck, the semi-truck, and the truck drug him for almost a mile, didn't even realize that it hit him. And it caught his car on fire, and he was killed. He was burned to death in the car. He survived the initial impact and was burned to death in the car. And so the case was, we settled with the trucking company pretty within 8 months or so, and then went after the trailer manufacturers, semi-trailer manufacturers, for not having side under ride guards. And that was the trial. It was against the trailer manufacturer. And we learned a lot about that. Talk about a new puzzle to solve. There had not been a verdict against a trailer manufacturer, I think, for about 15 years. Is that right? 14 years.
Throughout the entire country?
Mm-hmm. For 14 years. Because the trailer manufacturers, well, let me start at the beginning. If I'm going to tell the story right. 50 years ago is when underride first became a problem. And that's when Jane Mansfield, if you'll recall, you probably don't recall because you're too young, ran her Cadillac. She wasn't driving. She was a passenger in the front seat into the back of a semi on a country road in the fog. And the big headlines were this giant movie star was killed. She was killed. Her lawyer was killed. Her agent were killed. They were all sitting in the front seat, and they underrode the back of this semi truck. So they went underneath it like this. The three of them were killed, and her three kids in the back survived, including her daughter, Mariska Hargitay from SVU.
Wow, I didn't know this.
That's her daughter, and she still has a little scar on her head from that crash when she was a little girl.
Wow.
And because there was a huge public outcry over underrides, that because they underrode the end, the federal government began looking at having regulations that required semis to have a bumper that would not allow cars, passenger vehicles, to underride the semi-trailers. And the industry fought it. And they finally, after about 50, they started requiring a certain kind of rear underride guard, and it got more and more strict over time while the industry fought them. But early on, almost within a couple years of the Mansfield killing, when she was killed, the federal government put out a thing and said, okay, you guys are giving us such a hard time. Basically, the trailer industry is giving us such a hard time. We're going to keep working on rear underride guards, but we're going to rely on you to come up with a side underride guard, because the bigger space is actually on the side of the truck, not on the back of the truck. And we're going to rely on you to come up with something. And of course, for 50 years, the industry has done nothing. Said, you can't tell us what to do, and we're not going to put on side underride guards, and you can't make us, we're not going to do it. And so 300 to 500 people are killed every year in side underride collisions. Some like this, coming out of T-bone in an intersection. Some, like our kids, swept up on the side by a semi. And another 5,000 or 6,000 are brain injured, because when you go under a semi, it takes out all of the safety devices on your car. The A-pillar is gone, the airbag doesn't work, so you're typically brain injured. So we took on the whole industry. And what happened, there was a verdict in about the early 2000s, and I think a jury in Texas found them liable for about $500,000 is all. But instead of taking that verdict and saying, okay, maybe we should fix side underrides now, instead the industry bonded together and entered into a joint defense agreement where they all bonded together to create industry experts, kind of like the tobacco experts that the cigarette industry created, to come in and testify in all of their cases that you can't build a side underride guard. There's no way to build a side underride guard. It's impossible. And, don't make us do this. And the industry is reasonable and blah, blah, blah. And so they fought all of those since the early 2000s. And this was the first one since about 2004, first verdict since 2004 that we had up in Santa Fe. So that was the case. That was the case that we were going after him on.
All right. So using that case as our exemplar, and I'm sure there's most of it follows through on most of your cases, but like the 90 days before trial, what are some of your processes that you are going through to get yourself ready and prepared to stand up and announce ready?
Well, we do a lot of focus groups, both internally, and we start focus groups fairly early in our office. We sit everybody around, all of our staff around, and talk to them about the facts of the case and sort of pick their brains about what stands out, what are the best facts, what are the worst facts, what things do we need more information on, so that we're going out and getting that discovery. And then as we start getting closer to trial, we do more formalized focus groups, both in our office with people from the area, or sometimes we use services that do online focus groups to find out what issues we may have problems with. And so we do a lot of that 90 days out, but we're getting exhibits ready. 90 days out, we're getting exhibits ready. We're trying to figure out what our demonstrative evidence is going to be. For this case, we got a Google Earth view of the roadway and had it blown up huge on foam core boards, and ordered there's a place called Makerspace that you can 3D print any vehicle. So got the specs for the truck and the specs for the little car and had them 3D printed so that we had, for the jury, people could use these vehicles to show where the cars went three-dimensionally right in front of the jury. And that I think those vehicles only cost like $600 to have them 3D printed to life, like the actual specifications of the vehicles. And built a little median. So we had the whole thing three-dimensionally in the courtroom. It was just really wonderful.
That makes such a difference too, because like I was working on a case with a buddy of mine that was a trucking case where the truck was parked on the side of the road, but not an emergency situation. The guy was just taking a leak or something. And when I came in, he initially had like some kind of magnetic board with little stickers on it. I'm like, what the hell is this? But he ended up paying a guy to build a model of the roadway. And I don't think there was 3D printing back then, because it was like 12 years ago. But we got, we ordered vehicles to scale it best we could, but it was so much better because then people are down there, the experts, the witnesses, moving things around. You know what I mean? Moving the vehicles around, and it makes such a difference. And the jurors all up out of their seats, looking over the rail, trying to stare at it. So it's such an attention getter too. So it makes such a difference to have a model as opposed to some type of magnetic flat map or something like that. So.
And and we do all of it, right? So we had a video animation of the wreck, and we had that, and we had, but the thing that engages the jury the most, you're right, is sort of the toys. I mean, you get the toys out, and you start playing with the toys, and it's a pretty good sign when the jury asks for the toys back in deliberations. That's always a good sign.
Always a good sign.
You're asking for your stuff. Always a good sign. Yeah. So yeah, that was it. So we're big on visuals. So we did a lot of that, and yeah, that's sort of what we're doing 90 days out.
Okay. And let's
getting the jury instructions, all that stuff.
Right. Now let's talk about voir dire. How did you, when you approach voir dire, what is your mindset approach to it? And then how did you approach it in this case?
So you always have to ask the thing that scares you the most, right? Which is, again, opposite of what we were taught in law school. In law school, they said, oh, good Lord, don't mention that race thing, because then the juries will all be thinking about it. You're going to poison the whole jury pool if you talk about race. And of course, that's the stupidest advice ever. The truth is, you want to pull the poison out of the jury, because if you don't pull it out in jury selection and get them off the panel, they're going to just take it back to the jury room and talk about it back there. So it is your job to find the case killers and to get them off the jury. And then the secondary thing that I'm trying to do, in addition to asking the things that scares me the most and get those case killers off the jury, is to, if you can, put the jurors in the place of your plaintiff. Put them where they could see this happening to them or to their families. And so for this case, we spent a lot of time. You've got to sneeze too.
I know I'm on the mute on the sneeze, so I'm not interrupting you.
That's really good. So we spent a lot of time in jury selection in this case, saying, how many of you have had an experience with a semi on the roadway? Right? Like a scary experience with a semi on the roadway. And we spent 30, 40 minutes, everybody talking about, oh yeah, then this truck ran me off the road and blah, blah, blah happened and blah, blah. So that from the get-go, in this case, people are putting themselves in the place where a kid was, and reliving and testifying to the other jurors about the horrible experiences they had with semi trucks. And Well, what could be done about that? We talk about, what do you think can be done about that? Well, I don't know. And then we talk about that. Have you ever heard of side underwrite guards as a ways to keep you from, were you afraid you were going to go underneath the track? Oh, yes, I was. Well, have you ever heard of side underwrite guards as a solution to try to keep people from going under a truck? Well, no, I haven't heard about that. You wonder why they haven't developed side underwrite guards. Things like, so we spent a lot of this jury selection talking about the dangers of trucks and the dangers to them and to their families of trucks, and so they were already worried about trucks before we ever started the trial. And then I had the most interesting thing happen that it had never occurred to me that made me change the way I did jury instruction. It happened in this trial.
Well, what is it?
We were asking them about how do you feel about parents, because his parents were there, asking for money damages for their son's life. And this old crusty guy raises his hand, redneck guy, and he says, well, I can't tell you with them sitting here. I can't tell you the truth with his parents sitting here. Because it will hurt their feelings, right? And Dan, that had never occurred to me that there were some people who were not saying the truth because they didn't want to hurt the feelings of the parents who were sitting there. And as soon as he said it, I said, thank you. That had never occurred to me. And I turned to the judge and said, do you mind if my clients step out of the courtroom so that this juror and the other jurors can be honest about their feelings about damages for parents requesting damages for their kids? And the parents stepped out of the courtroom, and this guy said, all kinds of horrible stuff that got him struck off the jury. But he wouldn't have said it if I'd kept him in the room, and if he hadn't said to me, I can't tell you the truth unless you take those people out of the room. And so ever since then, if I'm talking about something sensitive that I think people won't want to say in front of my clients, I ask my clients to leave the room so they can be honest. And that had never occurred to me till then.
When you first, do you have some beginning or shtick or whatever routine, whatever you're going to call it, that when you first stand up to get your connection rolling with the jury? Or is it different every time? Just different every time, wherever you're at.
Different every time. And it's usually about the case. I usually don't beat around the bush that I'm this person and this is what justice is and this is jury. So what a waste of time any of that is. They've been sitting there they've already listened to the judge. I just usually get up and say, this case is about X. Boom. That's, we're going to try to change what happens with trucking companies on side underwrite guards. And you probably have never heard about side underwrite guards, but let's start by talking about trucks, and I want you to talk to me first. I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to tell me what you're thinking, and let's get right to it. And I usually get right to whatever is the thing that's freaking me out the most, and that's exactly how I say it to them. The thing I'm most concerned about in this case is this particular fact, and I'm wondering how you feel about that.
How do you speak about, or do you talk about money in voir dire and the amount of money?
I do not talk about the amount of money I'm going to ask for, but I do talk about money and sort of ranges of money and where they are and what they can give.
How do you frame that question?
Well, I can't tell you on video because people will file motions to exclude it.
Well, could they just get a transcript of your proceeding and do the same thing?
Well, they have never done it before. They've never done it before, Dan.
Fair enough.
Well, and I've never explained it. I mean, if I explain it, if I explain it on the air, then it becomes a problem.
Got it.
But it involves anchoring. So I talk about numbers, and I often talk about big numbers, but I don't say this is what I'm going to ask for in trial.
Got it. Well,
so
maybe
I will tell you over drinks. I'll tell you over drinks.
Fair.
Or anybody else over drinks in Vegas. How's that?
There'll be a lot of time for drinks in Vegas.
Okay. All right.
A lot of time. Okay. How about sympathy? Do you talk about sympathy in jury selection?
Yes, but I do it, and I also do that differently since my husband died 5 years ago. So I thought, because of all the work that we do, where the worst thing in people's lives happen and they come to see us, that I thought I understood about profound grief. And I will tell you, I did not understand it until my husband died. I did not really understand it until my husband died. And it's different when you lose somebody that you care about so much. It's gutting. And so since that, I now ask the jurors, particularly in death cases, how many of you have experienced profound grief? And I will tell you, Dan, that most of them don't even need to raise their hands, because instantly, I mean, not just the death of somebody that you cared about, but somebody that you love so much that it was a horrific experience for you. People's eyes instantly start to water. I mean, you could just look out in that crowd, whether you're asking it in a seminar, when I'm doing it in a seminar, or when you're asking a jury pool, and you know who in the group have experienced profound grief. And then I ask them if it's okay to talk about what they went through. Like, who did they lose? Did they lose a child? Did they lose their mother? Did they lose a spouse? And I try to save them from the strikes by the defense, because as you know, what usually happens is the defense stands up and says, how many of you had somebody die? Okay, all you guys have to get off, because this will be too traumatic and too emotional for you, right? And everybody says, oh yeah, that would be. So instead, before the defense can do that, I say, when I talk to these people that have experienced profound grief, I say, it's different. And I now know that it is a different thing to experience profound grief. And if we convene a jury, my client is entitled to somebody who understands that, a jury of their peers, who can explain profound grief to the rest of the jurors, because the rest of the jurors who haven't experienced it won't understand it. And was this event long enough ago where you think you could sit on this jury and be fair to both sides, but be there to explain to the rest of the jurors what it's like to lose a child, because you've experienced that? Now, by the way, if it's just happened, or if it's within a few years, they cannot. And you should just say, look, this is so recent, you may not be the right person on this jury, but for the rest of you who've had this happen in your past, I need you on my jury to be able to explain this to the rest of the jurors. And that, Dan, preserves them against the defense challenge, Because now when the defense stands up and says, well, you don't really want to be on this because you had a person die too, they say, no, I want to be there to help explain it to the other jurors, right?
It's a little prehabbing.
That's exactly it. And in sort of inoculating them against the defense.
Right.
So
one last topic before I do your burden of proof. Do you talk about it?
Yep.
And if so, how?
Always. Yeah. I always talk about it as, it's just either one little bit, or like one sheet of paper on the halves of the two reams of paper. I said, we're going to prove it much more than that. But if that's it, well, you rule in our favor. So we talk about, and who has a problem with that? And by the way, why I ask that question is not to teach them about burden of proof, but is to get off the people who are anti-tort jurors who will say, I think that's not a fair burden. I think you should have to prove it to more. Those are the people who weren't going to be for you anyway. So I use it as a way to prop up the anti-tort jurors.
All right. Now let's shift gears to the next stage of trial of opening statement. And I know you're giving a lecture on opening statement in Las Vegas, but give us your approach and philosophy on opening, and especially like visual strategy, a few depo clips, things like that to really drive home your, to win it in opening.
So, there are some lawyers who say, oh, here's how you do opening. You do it the same way every time. And I don't do that. I think every case has its own story and its own best story and the best way to tell it. And so I've done openings in all different kinds of ways, including sometimes in the right case, putting people in the position of the plaintiff from the get-go in the story, to sort of have them identify with the plaintiff in my story. And um, you do that through storytelling, of course, and switching from the general tense. I mean, you can't call out can't call out anywhere and say, put yourself in the same place as the person. You can't do that, but you can talk about um, the most uncomfortable at time when you go to a doctor um, is when they take you, and I used to, when a person goes to the doctor, is when they take you into the examination room and they make you take off all your clothes and they give you that little white thing that's paper or sometimes cloth, and it only ties, and you can't ever figure out whether you put the tie in the front or the tie in the back, and no matter where you put it, something's exposed, no matter where you put it. And then you're sitting there on that crinkly paper with the smell of antiseptic in your nose, and you're waiting for the doctor to come in to tell you whatever it is you're there for. It was the test cancer, you know? Why do I have this sore throat that won't go away? Whatever the horrible thing is, that is the time when you are the most vulnerable of all at any moment in your life. It's right there in that doctor's room. And that's why they have rules against people coming in and trying to sell you something at that particular moment, and why are laws that say a doctor can't have a financial interest in implanting pacemakers or implanting devices or giving you a certain kind of drug, because then he has a conflict when he comes in to give you advice. He's giving you stuff that's going to benefit him. And all this was to set up a case where a doctor was implanting pacemakers and defibrillators in people who didn't need them. But the idea of the opening was to take people and put them right there with them being in the same circumstance. And this doctor would come to people in the ER and say, would sort of troll the ER. And he'd say, oh, you're here for a fractured ankle or whatever it is. Maybe we should just check your heart while you're here. And he'd take them into the cath lab and they'd come out and he'd say, oh my God, you're going to die. You need a pacemaker or a defibrillator. They said, look, I'm like 40 years old. What are you talking about? No one's told me I had a heart condition. Maybe I should get a second opinion. And he'd say, well, you could go get a second opinion, but because you're such at risk, I need you to sign this paper saying you understand you could die on the way home. And so people would get pacemakers and defibrillators implanted because this guy was just full of shit. He was just making it all up so he could sell more pacemakers and defibrillators, he and the Biotronic company together. So that's how I started that case, to sort of take the person and put them exactly where all of our clients were. And we had 35 clients who got pacemakers or defibrillators they didn't need.
What year was that case? I remember either hearing about it or reading about it.
About 10 years ago. Yeah. Here in New Mexico.
So the case that we were talking about, the case that we were just talking about.
Underwrite case.
Right.
Side underwrite case. Gosh. How did I? So I don't even know how I started it. I think I started it the way I told you the story, which is to start from Jane Mansfield.
Right.
Let me tell you about Jane Mansfield and how they first developed it, and then all these years that go by. So we have 50 years of misconduct by the trailer industry before they ever hear about our crash. And so that's how we set up the opening for that particular case.
Okay.
Because you usually want the bad conduct before you talk about the crash itself.
So it's not just a one-off event, but a systemic failure.
Correct. And it has been going on for years and years and years and years. It didn't just happen 2 weeks ago. It happened starting 50 years ago till now. Yeah.
There was ample opportunities to prevent this tragedy if they weren't so damn greedy.
Again. Well, and we actually had we had two timelines. So we start the 50 years, and then we get to 16 years ago, 16 years before the crash, which is the date that Riley Hine was born. So we talk about what they're doing and what Riley Hine's doing as he goes off to school, and then they're still not fixing it. They're creating this joint defense agreement rather than fix it, and he's going off to kindergarten, and then they're doing this, and then he's going off to school, and then they're doing this, and so we have at some point it became 2 tracks. So now they had, from the time he was born, they had 16 years to fix it, and still didn't fix it. So that was kind of powerful. I think that worked.
I can imagine. And at TLU Vegas, my friends Satch Oliver and Philip Miller, I think they're doing a presentation on timelines, just on timelines.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just you
There's
hear
all different kinds.
right, but here you say that just allows me to visualize how effective that would be in that case. So moving to proving your case, witnesses. What do you do as far as witness preparation? Is there anything special you do to prep your plaintiffs or before and after witnesses to get them ready for the stand? Or your experts? That's what, people have a lot of challenges with direct examination. Seems like, more so than they have with cross. They feel more confident in cross. So
I think direct is the hardest because you're out of control. You're like, you have to buy who, what, where, and why. And now they can say whatever you want. You can get so the way we did direct in this case was, usually particularly when you're putting on damages, the court limits you to a couple damages witnesses. And rather than do that, because Riley had a father, a mother, a sister, and a girlfriend, and a couple teachers. What I told the court what we would do was that we would take no more than 2 hours on damages, but we wanted to put all these witnesses on. And we had each of them talk about a different aspect of Riley's character. So his dad talked about his sense of humor and talked about all the practical jokes that he used to play on him. His mom talked about his perseverance and how, he was a terrible runner, but he kept practicing and practicing and practicing and made the track team. And his sister, I forget what his sister talked about, but his girlfriend, which, they were both, she was 15, he was 16. They were their first girlfriend-boyfriend relationship. And she talked about, and was just this like goofy teenager. And you could see what he was like through her, it was, using all the teenage phrases and stuff. And she was talking about how she came to his school. I think she came from California. And she was kind of the nerd kid because she was in this mountain school from this big school in California. Nobody would talk to her. And he was the first person who came up and talked to her. And she's, and he gave her a chance and started taking her around, and they became boyfriend and girlfriend. And on the day he was killed, she was on a bus going through the same canyon and saw the fire and didn't realize it was him. Drove right by it, didn't realize it was him.
So in the case of Riley, who did you, when it came to, calling your first witness, tell us, who did you start off with in that case?
We started off with our expert. To explain the history of this, the history of site underwriting. And our expert was a guy who, when the industry refused to build site underwrites, is one of the 12 or 13 different people over the 50 years who had come up in their garages with a design for a site underwrite guard. Only he actually tested his and had it out on cars, and it actually worked. And it had been tested by the Insurance Institute. And so he gave us the whole history, which was the opening statement. Here's the history of the industry and all the stuff they haven't done, and why it's been left to independent inventors to come up with these things, even though these giant trailer manufacturers have these huge facilities where they test their trailers and test all these devices on the trailers. And they won't even buy, when these inventors would come up with the site underwrite guard, they wouldn't even buy the site underwrite guard and go out and test it to see if it would work, because they weren't going to do it. And their position at trial was that you couldn't do it, couldn't be done. By the way, since our case, since our huge verdict, this company that we sued has come up with a site underwrite guard, by the way. How's
Great
that?
Stuff. See that? Spank 'em.
After saying all through trial, can't be done. It's impossible to do. Even though your designer has done it, and even though he's tested it, even though it works, can't be done. There's all kinds of problems with his, and they did one almost exactly like his, is what they designed.
That's terrific. So
yeah,
cross-examination. Give us your thoughts on and your best practices on cross and things you try to accomplish when you cross.
Well, that's one of the things I'm going to talk about while we're there. I like to create a story for each witness, and early on in the cross let the jury know how I feel about them.
Give us an
And can be
example of that.
In this case, they're economists. Our economist comes up, I think he came up with an amount of a little over $1 million for Riley's life, the value of Riley's life. And he's only 16, so you don't know what he's going to be. So, average, probably go to college because his parents did. So they come up with like, $12 million or something is his lost earnings over his life reduced to present value. They hire an economist who comes in and says, oh, no, it's 900,000. I mean, what kind of morally bankrupt company even spends the money to get somebody to save themselves 300 grand in the stupid thing? Anyway, so this guy hits the stand, this economist, and I said, wait a second. Got hired by the defense to come in here and try to knock dollars off the life of this 16-year-old boy, right? He says, oh, no, that's not, how they are. So I got hired, I got hired just to do an accurate analysis of his lost earnings. And I said, well, you understand, don't you, that had you come up with a number that was higher than $1.012 million, you wouldn't be sitting here. And they wouldn't be paying you to fly out here and testify. Well, I don't know about that. Well, no. I mean, I sort of called him on it right from the get-go. And then the other really interesting thing that I did that was not planned, but I thought of it just as I was cross-examining him, because it seemed like so little money, right? For this kid's life, this kid who got burned to death. So I started asking him a series of questions that went like this. So if the person who was killed was a medical doctor, would your numbers be higher or lower? Because we don't know what this kid would be. If he became a medical doctor, would it be higher or lower? He said, well, it depends what kind of doctor he was. I said, well, how about if he was teaching at the medical school? I said, okay, it would be higher. All right, if the person worked in a car wash, would it be higher or lower? Well, it would be lower. If they were a computer programmer or coder, would it be higher or lower? And it wasn't until about 3 in that the other side realized what I was doing. And what I was doing was I was asking the professions of the jurors, right? And the jurors got it almost instantly from the very first one when I said the guy who teaches at medical school, because they already found out the guy teaches at medical school. And the other side jumps up and objects. But there was like this thrill going through the jury room when I called out their profession, and to listen to this guy say, oh, well, their life isn't worth, it's worth less than 900,000, or it's worth a little bit more than 900. So it was just an interesting way to cross them and to point out, kind of how that's not really the full measure of the person anyway. And so that was kind of fun on cross.
Did you get to go through the rest of your professions of the jurors, or did the judge shut you down?
He let me do 2 more. He let me do do 2 more. Is what he said. I did 2 more. That was it.
I think we got the gist of what you're doing here, Ms. McGinn.
Oh, but the jurors got it. And that was the most important thing, that you're like talking to the jurors. Look at this. So if you died, they're going to call a guy in like this and try to knock 300 grand off the damages for your family. I mean, what hogwash is that? Anyway, yeah.
All right. Closing argument.
Yeah.
How do you think about closing argument? When do you start preparing? And
oh, you write it from the day the case comes into your office. You start writing closing argument. But this one, I actually cannot tell you what I said in closing argument for this closing, because this trial happened about 8 weeks after my husband was diagnosed with ALS, with the fatal disease ALS. And my husband was told that he had a year to live. And so when we got the diagnosis, I said to him, I've got this trial coming up, and should I put it off? And he said, no, they've given me a year to live. So I start this trial. The trial was up in Santa Fe. And so I had to be out of town. I was out of town, and my husband's 2 daughters who are nurses came and stayed with him. One stayed 1 week and one stayed the second week. But when I got back from trial after the first week, I realized he was dying much faster than we thought. And I offered to take a mistrial in the trial and, do it a different time. And he said, no, I'm going to be fine, right? So it is Wednesday. My closing is on Thursday. And my husband texts me in the courtroom. He's decided to go into hospice. And I text back again, okay, should I take a mistrial and come home? And he says, typical for him, no, I promise not to die till you get back, is what he said. And Dan, I finished out the afternoon and I gave closing argument the next morning. And I can't tell you a single thing that I said or did. I can't tell you a single thing. All I can tell you is at the end of closing, I said, and by the way, I hadn't told my clients whose son was killed that my husband was dying. I didn't tell them any of that stuff because that would just make them worry. So at the end of closing, when the other side finished their closing, I said to the judge, I'm going home now. And my associate's going to take the verdict and do all the jury instructions. I'm leaving, and I left. And I can't tell you what I did in closing on that case, but I can tell you that the next day on Friday afternoon, we got a $42 million judgment. So I must have done something, but I can't tell you what it is. I don't remember. How's that?
I can imagine. Not remembering. Can imagine not remembering. Well,
and true to his word, my husband did not die till I got back, and he died 10 days after the trial was over. So there you go.
Well, it was a met. Well, that I don't know what to say about all that, Randy, except it is life and
hardest stuff ever.
Never
and
stops.
That's how I understand profound grief now. That's the reason I understand profound grief now. And I as you know, you've known me, Dan. I'm like a positive, happy person all the time. Had you said to me I was a crying person, I would have said, no, I'm not a crying person. Like I was crying every day for a year. Just like, what the hell? What is this about? I mean, it was just devastating. And that was 5 years ago. So we're coming up on the 5th year anniversary of his death. So, but now I understand it. And it has opened me up in a way that nothing else in my life ever has. So it's connected me to people and to people's losses in a way that I wasn't connected before. So everything you learn from, right?
Yeah. It just kind of reminds me when last time I went to the trial lawyers college about 10 years ago or 12 years ago, my dad was in the hospital. He was 88. And I was like, don't do anything stupid until I get back. It's like, don't worry about it. I won't. Of course, 2 days later, I'm getting back on a plane, coming back home to, actually, I didn't come back home for a week because I figured there's nothing I could do there. And the craziest thing was a good friend of mine from the trial lawyers college, Daryl Edwards Jr., flew me back. And 2-3 weeks, like a month later, he died in a plane crash. And
oh my God.
Yeah, it was just really puts in perspective this little thing called life. And every day, what we got to do with each day to make it better in our lives and other people's lives. That's it. Every day, trying to make changes for the better in whatever little piece of the world that we can influence. And,
that's it.
Well, Randy, it was great spending this time with you and getting to know you a little bit better and
Dan.
your story.
Although I don't want to leave you on like a bummer grief story. So let me tell you a funny grief story and then we'll end it, okay? All right, so here's the funny grief story.
Okay.
If there could be such a thing, all right?
Right.
All right, it's my husband is dead, he's buried, everybody's gone home, and I'm all by myself and I'm feeling pitiful and sorry for myself. And so I go to our favorite place, because after someone dies, you spend the first year looking for them everywhere. You go all to the same places that you went, looking for them, expecting them to walk in. So I go to the place that we always had brunch, and it was a little hole in the wall called Duran's. And I sit up at the counter because I'm by myself rather than sit at the table with our regular waitress. And this young man comes up across the counter and says to me, what would you like? And I said, well, If you've got the carne adobada, I'll have the carne adobada huevos rancheros. And as soon as I get it out, of course, it's the thing we ordered every single week. And I burst into hideous, horrible crying, the kind where you can't breathe, where tears are just streaming down my face and I'm, when you can't breathe. And I'm just weeping, sitting at the counter weeping. And this poor young man, he's like 18, 19, like leans back like this. And then he leans across the counter and he puts his hands on both sides of my shoulders and he says, "It's okay. We have the carne adobada," he says to me. And what he's thinking is, she must really love that carne adobada because she's crying if we don't have it. And of course, then I burst out laughing because that was pretty hysterical. And so you can have happy, funny things even in the middle of being really, really sad. So there you go.
All right.
That's better.
That's
a better
better.
ending.
That's better. It's
Okay.
like,
All right.
it's like that song, Joy and Pain, Sunshine and the Rain. So they always go together, you know?
That's together always. Okay.
The flavors
All
of
right.
life. All right, Randy. Well, I will see you in about 90 days or so in Las
Okay.
Vegas, and hopefully you'll get there on Tuesday and participate in some fun activity and make a bunch of new friends before the conference even starts on Wednesday. Hope maybe
Okay,
you're
sounds
interested.
great. I'd
And
love to.
it's going to be great. We'll see you there.
I'm looking forward to it. Okay, Dan.
Thanks,
Thanks a
Randy.
lot. Have a
Bye-bye.
great rest of your day.
You too.
Okay, bye.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyersuniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.